The following program is a special presentation of the Big Ten Network, produced in association with the University of Iowa.
Welcome to Conversations from the Iowa Writers Workshop. I'm Keisha Lynn. Ethan Canin is the author of 3 short story collections, including Emperor of the Air and the Palace Thief, and 4 novels, including Carry Me Across the Water and his most recent, America, America. He is a graduate of Stanford University, the Iowa Writers Workshop, and Harvard Medical School, and spent some time practicing medicine before deciding to focus on writing. He is on the faculty of the Iowa Writers Workshop. Ethan Canin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Keisha. I should correct you because it's actually 2 collections of stories and 4 novels.
Oh, okay.
We can use that one next year.
You can use that one next year? Okay, that'll work. We're here to talk about your most recent novel, which is America, America, ambitious title for an ambitious novel. Reviews are saying they're calling this your big novel. Mm-hmm. Like, they're comparing it to Gatsby, they're comparing it to Dreiser's An American Tragedy. Mm-hmm. I always wonder about when you hear about something being the big novel, as if you have no other novels in you. This is like the big one. But after a long career of writing, tell me about how this novel developed.
It's funny, when the book came out, the first several reviews, one after the other, called it an epic, and I swear to you, I was surprised, because I just thought I was writing a book, and I guess it is sort of epic in its scope, but books just sort of get longer as you get further along in your career. This book started out, it's actually something much smaller, it's just a little character story about a working class boy who meets an upper class girl. And I'd written about 300 pages of it when September 11th happened. Right. And I stopped writing for about 2 or 3 years. And as almost everybody in the country did, I became more serious about history and politics in those 3 years. And when I came back to the book, it became a political novel. A senator entered in a race for the presidency, the whole thing that wasn't even in the book before. And it's actually sort of the backbone of the book now. Right. Was an addition that came years after beginning it. And that's what novel writing is like, at least for me and for a lot of literary writers. You just don't know what you're doing, and you see what develops, and you see if there's something that will surprise you, you being the writer, and hope it can surprise the reader too. But it does feel like a much bigger book to me than any other book I've written. Yeah, well, it's very ambitious in scope, and you're describing, not to put too fine a point of it, the American dream. And as it's typified in this small town in Pennsylvania, that describes how these people are, they travel through time, rather, I should say, they are traveling through the evolution of America, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it begins in the early 70s, sort of in the peak of liberalism, the peak of the power of liberalism, when a lot of the sort of great social legislation, say that Johnson or FDR had passed, was sort of at its peak, and goes up to pretty much the present day. It was interesting because there's obviously a guy who runs for president in this book, and he gives a speech called The Bridges of Hope, sort of in the middle of this book. And I wrote this, 3 years before I'd heard of Barack Obama, or 2 years before, and it was interesting how it sort of presaged all that stuff.
Let's get ready now for the
Hell Week. It's craziness.
We've got to teach drill faster than we've ever had to teach it before.
This is probably one of the hardest jobs we've ever had to do.
Okay, if you don't know pregame by tomorrow, then you won't march pregame.
Just being part of something that's larger than yourself. Friendships are made here and kept for a long time.
Pocket Marching Band is bigger than anything I've ever been a part of.
This is the greatest college experience you can have.
How do you recognize a prestigious university? They're the ones that have earned distinction for academic excellence. They are known for having rigorous standards and for professors who are tops in their field. Great schools expect only the best from their students and deliver nothing but their best to the world. The University of Iowa offers students a world-class education. For over 160 years, we've earned our place among America's great schools. The University of Iowa, be remarkable.
Iowa doctors on the flying hospital. studying nature in the outdoor classroom.
It's just a total learning experience and marvelous.
A digital human with real results. Dance Marathon's record-breaking year.
It was an emotional roller coaster.
And a fast, fun way to get to the game.
It's all black and gold. You can't miss it.
On Iowa Magazine.
When you bring your heart problem to University of Iowa hospitals and clinics, what's the difference? This is Kate's heart on our state-of-the-art scan. This is her cardiologist and radiologist, a uniquely integrated team that assures the most accurate diagnosis possible. And these are the specialists trained in the latest heart procedures and treatments, all working to make Kate better. Expertise multiplied exponentially. That's the academic difference. University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics.
It's very interesting. This book came out when it did. It came out earlier this year during what, for me, is the most exciting election cycle I've ever witnessed.
Oh my God, it was an incredible election. I like everybody else, I don't know what to do now.
I know.
What can I pay attention to? You know, my days are bereft.
Right. After all the time spent, paying attention to this. And it's interesting, you mentioned this is a senator that is running. And you set this during the 1972 presidential election. So we have, which was also a momentous election in terms of Nixon and Muskie and George McGovern. We have the senator called Henry Bonwiller, and we have the man that is behind him, who named Liam Materi, who is the son of the founder of this little town that everybody has worked for, has relatives work for, has several generations. It's a sketch of a time and a period that I wonder, I remember this being where I am, but it's a time that a lot of people seem to have, I don't know how much of this is even still around, but I thought that the book really captured that sense of, generations and loyalty and, old timers versus the new timers, different names for the town depending on whether you're an old timer or a newcomer.
Yeah, well, it's about a number of things. I mean, the political part of it is one part, but it's also about small towns, and it's about there's been a tradition for years of the sort of magnate who's also generous to the town, who's the philanthropist, who's the benefactor of the town, and who's good-hearted.
Yeah.
And that's what he is to me, this guy, Liam Materi. I pronounce his name Materi.
Right, okay.
But that's just
I didn't try to pronounce the father's name. I didn't attempt it. But he comes from Scotland, and he's a self-made man. He takes this town, he builds quarries, he has lumber mills, and pretty soon everybody is working for the Materi family. And so it shows this interesting description of class and how, and again, that Liam is such a benefactor. And then the narrator, Corey Sifter, as he says in the book, he believes he has benefited the most of all.
Yeah, and he's beholden in a way to the man who's helped him out. And that's what the book is about, really, in the end, is this young narrator who is a blue-collar boy, by dint of various things becomes sort of an upper white-collar or higher adult, and looking back on what this man gave him, what this great and generous benefactor gave him, and what this young man had to give in return.
Give in return, right.
And it's also about parenting, actually. It's also about being a father to children, to a large extent, too, and also being a son to parents. So, and that's sort of how the book started very personally, became very political, and in the end becomes personal again, at least for me.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And the last half of the book feels, or the last third of the book feels more like a personal character story about children and parents.
Which is actually one of my favorite parts of the book. I just have to say, I'm jumping a little bit ahead here. That whole, because by the time we're in that section, we're in the modern day, and we're seeing the change in the town, and we're seeing what was the vast estate, being carved up. And so Corey and his father and their friend go and they see this happening, and just there's some really interesting insights that you give in the story, in the book, about the evolution of this small town. Some things have already gone away when the story starts. Corey, we should explain that Corey actually goes back in time to when he was a teenager, and much of the story is about him working for the Materi family. And so that we are seeing what it was like for him in the 60s and the 70s, and then being involved with this political campaign with Senator Bonwiller and Liam Materi. And then the book jumps back and forth in time. I'm always curious about writers' choices when they decide to do that, in terms of how it seems as though he's figuring it out and we're figuring out the events with him.
You mean the going back and forth in time?
Right.
Yeah, that's something, I believe in experimental fiction. in the sense that a lot of people mistake experimental fiction for fiction that you can't understand, which I don't like at all. I like to be able to understand my stories, but I believe strongly in experimental fiction in the sense of an experiment, the way a scientist would do an experiment. That is, you keep everything the same, and you change one thing and see what it does.
Right, exactly.
So the thing that I've been working on in the last couple of books is this idea of how to tell a story in two different times at once. And I actually, it's kind of cinematic the way I look at it. There's a moment in movies that I adore, and it's one of my old students told me that it's called a sound bridge.
A sound bridge.
When the sound from the previous scene is carried forward into an utterly different scene, it connects you to the last scene, but also disorients you and reorients you into the new scene. And I love that moment in movies when you're disoriented, when the sound of the bomber engine over the Philippines becomes the sound of the shoe stamping machine in a leather plant in Louisiana.
Right.
100 years later. And I love that moment when you're disoriented and then reoriented, because I think it allows you to sink deeper into something.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to work on in fiction. If that might be my little 2-cent contribution.
Well, it was really interesting again because, and I always think, because I remember this time, I remember what this type of environment is like, and that he is in this place where he's a father, and he is the book opens up with the funeral of Senator Bonwiller, and he is kind of triggered into all these memories, and I found it interesting that he is asking himself all these questions about, without giving away too much of the book, about these events that happened that propelled Senator Bonwiller into the election, but then took him out, right?
Something bad happens in this campaign, something nefarious and dark, and this young narrator, as a teenager, is involved in it in ways that he's quite aware of, I think, at least in my vision of the book, and has kept secret, sort of as obligation to the man who has, in every other way, has been good-hearted and generous and philanthropic. And this book is his examination of that, of the guilt he feels over having been involved in something now that he is a father.
Right.
Choreographers out there more and more are looking for dancers that have the ability to move well with a strong technical background, modern and ballet. So students are required to take both classes at the same level.
I think in today's world it's important to be a well-rounded dancer, and I think Iowa definitely offers that.
I came here because I wanted to perform, but what I didn't expect is the program really helped me to realize that I liked choreography.
We bring in so many guest choreographers from LA this year and New York as well. The selling point, I would say, is having access to all these great choreographers.
Since I started out as a ballet dancer, the modern faculty have completely changed the way I approach dance.
If you're going to be a good teacher, every teacher learns from their students. You're always figuring out or learning new ways to help them improve.
You have students from Brazil, from Italy, from Japan, from Germany, from United States, from everywhere.
The University of Iowa Department of Dance has a very high recognition nationally and internationally.
One of the things that was really attractive to me to come here is the faculty is outstanding. We are teaching students what they actually have to do in the world of dance.
It's a very intensive program for performance. This is definitely one of the strongest departments in the country.
You always have an opportunity to perform and to show your work, and that was something very appealing to me, as well as when I saw the building and the studio space, I totally fell in love with it.
I think it's a great program. I definitely recommend it to anybody.
All of this works to prepare a student for what is to come in their dance careers. It's a total package at Iowa.
The University of Iowa, be remarkable.
It's interesting how characters come in and out of this book, and his own daughters don't show up till later in the book, but it's in a very pivotal point where he is, this modern day, and he's looking for his daughter, and he finds her with an older man, and it triggers something in him where he starts thinking about these events, the bad events that happened, and realizing that it wasn't until he became a father and then, saw that what happened is something that was unforgivably wrong?
Well, one of the things I always tell my students, you know, when we talk about writing fiction, and they come in with the idea that a character's supposed to change in a story or a novel, and I tell them, no, it's not true. I don't know where they get that idea. They get that in high school English somewhere.
Yeah.
And that, you know, when's the last time you ever changed? I usually say to them. But I do think that one of the few times one does change in one's life is when one has children. There's a before one had children, and then there's the after one had children. One of the great changes and great deepenings of one's life is to have children. I thought I lived a pretty full life before I had kids, and in retrospect, I feel like as though I was dead then. In terms of just of how deeply I can feel art now, how deeply books move me, how deeply movies, music, everything. There's something about having a child, having that vulnerability in the world that allows you to become vulnerable to all kinds of art.
Right. This lets me tie into a question I had about Iowa, your experience with Iowa, because you came here as a student in the 80s. And when I came to Iowa, one of the first stories I heard, it's become legend, workshop legend. Ethan Canin came here and only wrote so many pages. Okay. And, you know, those of us who come to Iowa as students, and as you know, we all, I think a lot of us wait for, you know, the hand to come back and say, okay, no, you don't belong here. But, you know, that you come with certain expectations of yourself. And then whatever happens, then, you know, you are launched on what will hopefully be a writing career. But a lot of things happened to you between the time you were here as a student and then the time you became a faculty.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's true. I didn't write a word when I was here. I find it in the last couple of months of my time here, I realized I had a thesis due, and I think at those days we needed something like 50 or 60 pages for the thesis. I don't know what it is now, and I had about 35 when I come, so I wrote the last 25.
Yeah.
And I figured that was it. That was it for me as a writer. I'd failed.
Yeah.
And I certainly had that feeling that everybody else has, that, you know, just got to make sure nobody finds out that I got in by accident. And people used to say to me all the time, "Don't worry, you'll write when you get out." And I thought, yeah, they're just saying that. They're, you know, but it turned out to be true. I mean, I as it turns out for me, I went to medical school of all the crazy things to do after that. But I went my first year of medical school. I got there and I wrote a book.
Yeah.
That year, because I don't know if there's part of that is the pent up energy from being here and thinking about writing and talking about writing, yet being inhibited because everybody's looking at you.
Right.
And I tell my students that, you know, their job here, a large part of their job is to find 2 or 3 friends who can be their critics for the next 30 years, who can be their colleagues for the next 30 years, because you need that.
Yeah.
You need that when you get out of here. Now, having come back, when I look back at my days, when I was a student here, it felt very competitive. Everybody was sort of nervous. And now when I look from the teacher's chair, everybody looks as though they're cooperative and nobody's competitive, but I'm sure it's just a question of vision. I don't think it's a generational change. Maybe it is. Maybe it is a generational change that your generation is more cooperative. But from where I sit, it actually seems as though the students really care about each other.
Yeah. I wanted to talk quickly about your writing process. There was an exhibit at the Old Capitol Museum here in Iowa City called A Community of Writers, and they had a exhibit of writers' workspaces, writers' desks.
Right.
This is actually available you can see it on www.writinguniversity.org. Okay. So they show your workspace, and what you see is a bunch of cards like this on a storyboard. Can you talk a little bit about your process?
Yeah, well, for example, this novel, America, has 4 or 5 plot lines. It takes place over a whole lifetime. There's several sort of discrete periods of time. So there's a lot of complex stuff to organize.
Yeah.
And a novel, by the nature of a novel, you can't hold it in your brain anyway.
Right.
Perhaps if you have a terrific brain, you can hold a short story in your brain. A novel is impossible. So what I do is I buy a 4x8 sheet of what they call extruded polystyrene, otherwise known as rigid foam insulation, that pink stuff that says Johns Manville on it usually, because it's the size of a piece of plywood, but it weighs about 6 ounces, so you can carry it out of your car by yourself. And I get colored index cards, and I assign each color to a plot, and I write down what each scene does, and I pin it up on this thing, and that is the only way I can see a book.
Yeah.
I can look at it, and I can say there's not enough green about 2/3 of the way through, or I see the pink is bunched up around the middle.
Right. Right.
And that's the only way to approximate what a reader might be experiencing. Because that's the thing with writing. You don't know what clues you're leaving.
No, you
You
don't.
never know. And nobody has written what he thought he's written,
Right.
or she has thought she has written. It's always a surprise.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I always try to express to writers that there is no one way to work. Everybody has to do what works for them. And I found it interesting in that I think you got a mechanical engineering degree when you were at Stanford.
I studied mechanical engineering. I ended up actually with an English degree.
That's right. You ended up with an English degree. I studied computer engineering, ended up with an English degree. George Saunders was an engineer.
Yeah.
And one thing that I noticed both you and he had in common is this idea of writing in a kind of technical sense, you know, in terms of, like you mentioned, the variable. Let's change the variable in the equation. Let's see what we come up with. It's one of the things that makes writing fun. I find myself doing some of that as well.
Well, the thing is, I mean, to actually invent something, to write a novel, you have to be sort of manic and intuitive and imaginative and illogical. Right. And the connections you have to make are just, you know, a couple of steps beyond what are logically expressible. And you have to trust those sort of unconscious magnetisms that pull you in a certain direction. And yet, but to edit a novel or to edit a book, you have to be sort of dark-minded and rigorous and self-critical. Yeah. So I think it really takes two halves of personality.
A world-class quartet celebrates 10 years at Iowa.
We're four very different personalities. There's probably somebody up on stage they can relate to.
Turning information into knowledge, informatics at Iowa.
Information is only valuable if you can find it.
Predicting the future in the Iowa electronic markets.
We're sort of at the cutting edge of forecasting.
And the future of flight training at the Operator Performance Lab.
We are trying to make airplanes become flight simulators.
On Iowa Magazine.
How do you recognize a prestigious university? They're the ones that have earned distinction for academic excellence. They're known for having rigorous standards and for professors who are tops in their field. Great schools expect only the best from their students and deliver nothing but their best to the world. The University of Iowa offers students a world-class education. For over 160 years, we've earned our place among America's great schools. The University of Iowa, be remarkable.
When you bring your health problem to University of Iowa hospitals and clinics, what's the difference? Take Dave. He starts by meeting with one physician, Dr. Skelly. These are some of the specialists Dr. Skelly collaborates with. And these are just a few of the gifted researchers, surgeons, nurses, and others who work together to give Dave the most advanced treatment options available in Iowa. Expertise multiplied exponentially. That's the academic difference. University of Iowa hospitals and clinics.
What makes a university great? At the University of Iowa, the numbers tell the story. The University of Iowa, be remarkable.
There have been movies made from some of your works, right? Story from The Palace Thief was made into a movie called The Emperor's Club. I believe you actually wrote a screenplay for one of yours. Tell me about
Takes place in your hometown
in my
of
hometown,
Cleveland,
yes.
or actually Shaker Heights, sort of. Yeah, that was made from a story called Baderzag and Zerulem, I believe. That's how you pronounce it.
Okay.
And of course, they changed the title to Beautiful Ohio. It has William Hurt in it. It's actually a good movie. You can get it on wherever, Netflix, or buy the DVD right now. And it's I've had several movies made. I've had the experience of that one, say, writing the screenplay, being on the set every day. And I've had like The Emperor's Club, where I didn't have anything to do with the screenplay. They invited me for a couple of days to the set, and they were sort of nice to me. And I recently had a movie made in which I didn't even know was being made. They paid me the money a couple of years ago, and then the next thing I knew, it was finished. Didn't know anything about it. Never went, never met them, never spoke to them. And I have to say that's probably the best experience.
Is that the best experience?
Of the three.
The thing where you drive up to the, who was it that said drive up to the border of California, you throw the movie, you throw the script over, and then you go back home? I forget which writer said that.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Yeah, so now, having had that experience, would you do it again, the screenplay writing, if somebody offered you that?
I would approach it with a little bit of wariness, or perhaps I would do it again, but I would not approach it with high hopes.
Okay.
Screenplays are, to me, a lot easier than novels, I'll tell you that. And people say screenplays are difficult. I don't find them to be. I mean, I've only written one, but, in a novel, if you want to convince somebody he's in Antarctica, it takes 50 pages of work and this and that. And in a screenplay, you write, exterior daylight, somewhere in Antarctica.
Start talking. Go.
Right, exactly. And if you need to create some kind of emotional moment in a screenplay, you're right, there is a moment.
Yeah.
I mean, and let the actor do it.
Absolutely.
That's may I be struck down for saying this, that's nothing compared to writing a book. It's a lot harder. Editing a movie is very much like editing a book. You shoot a can of footage and then you can make 100 different movies out of it.
Right. See, so there's a lot of different options here. I always wonder, as a writer, what must it be like to see your movie? Have you seen them? Because several movies have been made from your stories. Have you seen these movies?
I've seen most of them. I have not seen the last one, which is called The Year of Getting to Know Us.
Right, The Year of Getting to Know Us.
I've seen some footage of it, but not seen the whole movie. That's the one where, when I drove to the border of California and it wasn't even that, they threw the check over and I grabbed it.
Yeah.
What were we asking? I forgot the question.
No, I was asking, what is it like as a writer to see your stories on screen?
Basically, you kind of cringe. For some reason, I'm able to give things away. For example, The Emperor's Club with Kevin Kline. I thought Kevin Kline was terrific. I actually love that movie. I think it's a terrific movie. A lot of things different. It has a happy ending. There's a romance that's not in the book. But you know what? I actually didn't like the romance, but I liked the happy ending. I think his ending was just as good as mine. And I loved seeing some of those child actors. So I was able to, it almost reads as though it's somebody else's work.
Yeah. But it's still, you have, it's your story. It may not have necessarily been your vision, but it comes close to it, or it approximates it.
I guess so, but that kind of assumes that I set out to write a story and write it, and but that's not how it works. And you struggle, and God, you got to smooth the mud out of the way, and where is this story, and is that a story? So it's not as though I had this. And even at the, you know what it is to write. At the end of it, you're thinking, should I end it this way or should I end it that way? And there's so much just inconclusiveness with writing, and it can go 100 different ways. And I think if you're open to that, then you can enjoy the movie.
You can enjoy the movie
as a separate thing.
It's its own thing. I mean, we often talk about, is the book better than the movie? Is the story better than the movie? Vice versa. Those of us who read, usually the book is better than the movie. But if you look at them as separate things, and that you can appreciate movies for what they are. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ethan.
My pleasure, Keisha.
America, America, Ethan Canin's latest book. This is Conversations from the Iowa Writers Workshop. I'm Keisha Lynn.
The preceding program was produced by the University of Iowa in association with the Big Ten Network.